Well, good morning. Is everybody happy? I can tell you I'm happy because last time I was supposed to come, I was so dizzy. I got a dizzy spell and had to call Pastor Danny and had to cancel. But I still decided the next day to travel to West Virginia because I was feeling better. It was a bad idea. I landed up in the hospital with some kind of vertigo and drove back seeing double. It was quite fun. That would be the word, you know. But so today I'm happy to be here, even though I got the times mixed up and arrived late. So I don't know what's going on, but I'm full of joy. Thank you, Pastor Danny, and thank you for calling me Ed. That's the way I like people to call me, just Ed. As a matter of fact, last week I found out that the education department named a PhD after me. How about that? It's called Religious Ed. And I thanked them, but they said, no, it's not about you at all. Well, that has nothing to do with anything. We're going to do something a little different, and I'm going to consult with the pastor because actually we didn't have our first equipping event, and I'm going to see if we can have that today. I talked with the other churches, LaPorte and Michigan City, and they agreed, but I haven't talked to you yet. And then I will come back before the end of the year, hopefully, and have the equipping that we're supposed to have today so that we're all caught up. Is that all right? Just like the rest of the churches. But I just want to mention that we are living in times where a storm is brewing and where it seems that truth no longer matters, that what everybody is in their heart, that's what they believe, and sadly to say that even from today's pulpits, I believe that God's character is being maligned. In Ephesians, and I can't see that far, so I may need to turn around. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. Ephesians 6:12, if you would like to read with me the following words. It says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities and against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." And therefore, the Apostle Paul says that we ought to clothe ourselves with the armor of God. We do have a struggle, and we should not be complacent. And the struggle is really about God, not about the church, not about who we can invite, which that's important, or how churches grow, or to have a full church. Really, our struggle is about the character of God. And every week, may I say, God's character is being put into question. And I'm not going to get into further details, at another time I may. But every week, it is being preached that God makes mistakes, that he doesn't know what he does, and then he covers his mistakes by making even greater mistakes. And you go, where are you getting all that? Well, there is a teaching that is being taught, and that is that somehow, some way, we are immortal. Is that all right? And I say immortal because if you believe that after you die, the body, your spirit continues. In other words, that somehow you have intrinsic immortality. Are you with me or not? And we won't get into that aspect, but that just something dies, but the essence continues forever. And that God created us with that capacity to exist forever in one form or another. And that because God realized the mistake he had made, because the very people he created immortal could rebel against him, because he also made another mistake. He gave them autonomy. Are you with me? The ability to decide between good and evil, which is a big mistake if you're going to make immortal beings. Is that right? Because if they decide to go another way, they could really ruin the universe. So now what does God do? He creates a place the people that do not obey him, that do not love him. They could cause havoc throughout the universe, and it's called hell. And which is not a big problem. Well, it is actually, because that makes God, in the eyes of any thinking person, the worst sadist that ever existed in the universe. And you say, what do you mean the worst sadist? Well, it means that there was a man, an actual man, who took people who did not agree with his regime, and he hooked them with meat hooks under their arms and would raise them up in front of their family on top of an industrial-sized shredder. You all are familiar with paper shredders, right? Well, there are larger shredders that shred tires, and some even shred cars, and it's the same concept. And he would raise this man up in the air in front of his family and lower him into this shredder. And once the person fainted because of the pain and the drop in blood pressure, they would put tourniquets around his legs and pump him up with adrenaline so he would wake up. And then they would do it again and again. Now, sorry for that description, but that's mild compared to the suffering that people will have throughout eternity in the flames of hell. Did you get that or not? This man was Saddam Hussein. And we would say that that person should not be among the living. Are you with me or not? Should have never existed a person like that. But yet, we can say this about God, our loving Creator, that He is happy, in a sense, when those who have not followed Him would be put to the tortures of hell. Are you with me or not? That is saying something terrible about the God who we believe in. If I keep up this morning, we'll get all rallied up about our God, because there are many other things that are putting a stigma upon the character of God. And in these last days, really, it does matter what people believe about God, because He is our only hope. And if we have a wrong hope, we have no hope at all. So we talk about these things, and some of you are saying, well, we've never preached that at this church, so good, we can rest at ease. Well, I'd like to talk about some things that even we need to be careful about as we serve our God. You see, grace matters. Grace matters. There are three things that I believe are important for us to believe about God. Grace matters. In Colossians chapter 1 and verse 21, if you will follow with me. Colossians chapter 1 and verse chapter 1 and verse 21. Sorry, I have to look back at this. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now He, God, has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you what? Holy in His sight, without blemish, and guess what? Free of accusation. Free of accusation. That free of accusation is used several parts in the Bible. You see, God's grace is so great, if I may. It is so effective that when God's grace is placed upon our lives because we accept it, because we ask for it, are you with me? We are free, completely free from any accusation. Okay? So I'm going to stop here because this you've heard before. But I don't know if we really get it. You see, the whole issue is about accusation. And accusation is that there is one being in the universe who really dedicates his time to accusing. And it is the devil. He says, the Bible says that the devil is the accuser of his brethren. And and the devil does a great job at that. And the reason he does it is because when we fall, and we fall again and again, something starts clicking in our mind that we're not worthy of God's grace. Because we have habits that break us down. And that accusation, we doubt whether God's grace can cover us. Yes, it covered us a long time ago, but does it still cover us today in our state? And there are many who have lost faith because they really don't believe that God can forgive them because of the many times they have faltered over and over. Are you with me or not? I hope I'm talking to real people, because if you're real, guess what? We have brokenness. Is that all right? And I'm not justifying brokenness. What I want to say is that God's grace is sufficient to even cover our brokenness. And if someone here today, even today, is doubting and saying, well, I know that God can cover our brokenness, but in my life, in my private life, if you really knew who I was, I don't know if God could cover. And that is the great news. The great news is that is the devil's lie. That Christ's sacrifice on the cross of Calvary is not sufficient to cover your sins. Did you get that or not? Which puts the whole issue in question. And yet God emptied heaven on your behalf. And Jesus went to great lengths. Are you with me? He could have died a death in the sanctuary as they would have taken the lamb, but he died one of the worst deaths in order to go the length to be able to provide a sufficiency. Are you with me or not? Amen. And that sufficiency, the devil should never take away from you. Amen. Because God is grace and love. But you see, grace matters not only to us, it matters to others. Because when we doubt the grace of God, we're not able to provide it to others. Are you with me or not? When we have struggles in our life and we don't recognize that maybe Christ is not sufficient, and that we would never say that. Are you with me? We would say, but I'm a great sinner. Are you with me? And I'm such a great sinner that Christ's grace may not be able to forgive me. And that is the devil's lie. But if that lie, we believe it, we have a difficult time dispensing grace to others. Because we may have someone come to our fellowship, are you with me or not? And they don't understand the love of God. And they may come and they may falter. And we're loving, is that right? We're loving and kind. That's who we are as Adventists. Yes, but only to a point. Are you with me or not? No. Only to a point, because next time get it right. Are you with me or not? You know, you can come the first time and wear shorts to church. But someone will let you know that next Sabbath, wear pants, man. What's the matter? Come appropriately dressed, right? Now, I know these are insignificant things, but you can translate them to all parts of life. That if someone comes and all of a sudden they don't conform in a short time, then we are pointed out to them. Get your act together. Are you going to abuse God's grace? Or are you with me? And yet, we struggle, but they cannot. Did you get that or not? And because we believe that somehow God can't forgive us, they can't forgive them. Did you get it or not? And does this really matter? Oh, does it matter? Oh, does it matter? I've been doing evangelism for now, well, I've done it all my life and ministry, but with the Institute for 25 years. And I had the privilege of working with Russell Burrell. Have you ever heard of Russell Burrell? Yes, of course, if you've read Revolution in the Church and had when they moved from Chicago to Andrews. Actually, that's when they picked me up. And interesting thing was that every time we go to meetings, we would go to some churches and we would have meetings. Is that right? Evangelistic meetings. And we would spend about the same budget in advertising, the same amount of flyers, same type of place, if you know what I mean, right? In other words, the same, we're not talking here that we were comparing city churches with more country churches. No, same type of setting. And in some churches, there was a bountiful harvest. People were making decisions, and people that we didn't even know would come up at the last moment and say, I want to give my heart to Jesus. And in other churches, honestly, it was like pulling teeth. I know that's a bad illustration when we talk about souls, but every single person that was baptized, it was like a struggle, and very few and far in between. And after 25 years, I went to Russell and I said, I have a theory. And he said, what is it? And I said, as I look at all the churches, the many, many churches that we've held meetings in, the ones that people were making decisions were grace-oriented churches. And the ones we had a hard time were not grace-oriented churches. Now, I don't need to describe the non-grace-oriented churches. You say, what do you mean, grace-oriented churches? You mean they didn't know how to dress, and they had a drum set, and they played music in a certain way? No, it has nothing to do with that. Grace has nothing to do with our dress, and it doesn't have nothing to do with the style of worship we have. Grace means that these churches loved people, and they loved them no matter their condition, and they accepted them. And Russell thought for a moment, and he said, Ed, I think you're right. We should have done a study on this. And I said, it's too late now. But he said, every church, and he started thinking back, and it's true. And there is a reason behind that. Is that all right? And the reason is simple. God does not send his children to a church that will damage them. Did you hear what I said? Because God is real, and God is love, and he's bringing his children back home. But you, if your child were not coming to church, being blessed by God's grace, would you send them to a church that you knew that the first Sabbath they would get a cold shoulder? Are you in there or not? You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't send them to a church that you knew that maybe after a few weeks somebody would tell them something horrible, that they would get discouraged and never come back, right? Well, guess what? God doesn't either. So grace matters. Grace that we experience, grace that we live, grace that we share. And the grace and the great message is this, that because God is sufficient, we are free of accusation. Are you with me or not? Totally free of accusation. And if you doubt it, don't let the devil put things in your mind, because Christ is sufficient. I remind people that Ellen G. White has this little quote that she says that when we ask for forgiveness for the sins we have already asked for forgiveness, God is confused. God is confused. Because you see, God is so effective that when we ask the first time, it's not dependent on you, it's dependent on Christ. And because God looks at what Christ did for us, he forgives us immediately. And then when we ask again, do you know what he says? I don't know where their debt is. Are you with me or not? It'd be the same thing as if someone went and paid your debt at the bank, but you doubt it, and then the next day you go over and say, I'm here to make my payment. And the teller will look and they'll find a zero. And they'll say, what payment are you talking about? Someone came and paid fully. That is the fact of grace in God. Grace matters. Not only grace, but truth matters. Because it is the truth about God. And in John chapter 14, if you will follow with me. John chapter 14. Jesus says, and you probably know this text by heart, John chapter 14 and verse 16, he says, I think it's right, 14, 16. Yes. It says the following, if you love me, you obey my commandments. And if I ask the Father, he will give you another counselor to be with you. And I think this is forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him, but you know him. For he lives in you and will be in you. And I think that the text that I was looking for, actually, it says, I am the truth and the way. And I think I put the wrong text up there. So, verse 6, thank you. I got a 1 in there. Thank you so much. But it says, Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Because you see, that's what Jesus came to do. He came to share the truth about God. And in all beauty, before the last days of this earth, I believe God chose and called a group of people who would do the same thing, who would share the truth about God. But not only share it verbally, but they would embody it. Are you with me or not? That they would live it day to day. Jesus says, if you hold on to my teaching, you are truly my disciples, and then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You see, sometimes people like to be able to share with others and tell others what they need to believe. Are you with me or not? And we're pretty good at that. We know the book of Revelation, right? If you came to this church any time, you'd probably know the book of Revelation. And you know the 2,300 days, and you know the truths about health. Is that right? I didn't say hell, but health, right? And we know all these things. And you know, when we come up to people, we may be able to tell them, you know, I think that really Sabbath is the day to keep. Well, you see, sometimes what happens with that truth is that they look at us. Are you with me or not? Hold on. Hang in there. They look at us. And all of a sudden, truth has no relevancy. You say, yeah, but we told them the truth. Right. But does it matter? Does truth matter? Does it? Then your life would show it. Well, let me explain what I'm talking here. Do you know there's a fire in the building right now? There is a fire in the building right now. I don't see anybody getting up. You know why you're not getting up? Because what I'm saying, my body is denying the fact. Because if there were a fire in the building, I'd be saying it while I'm running out the door. Are you with me or not? And then you look and say, what is that guy doing? He just came to preach and ran out. Maybe there's a fire in the building. Do you get it or not? Because what we say matches what we do. And vice versa. And that's what I'm talking about, eloquent truth that is lived. Because if really the Sabbath matters, something needs to happen in our lives that shows that it matters. That creates an excitement in us. That not only we can't be quiet, but that would show. Soren Kierkegaard once said, the moment I take Christianity as a doctrine and so I indulge my cleverness or profundity or eloquence or imaginative powers in depicting, in other words, as I tell others about it, people are very pleased. And I am looked upon as a serious Christian. Now, listen to this. But the moment I begin to express it existentially, that means that I express it in my life. What I say, and consequently bring Christianity into reality, it is as though I had exploded existence. The scandal is there at once. Are you with me or not? And that's what, by the way, Jesus preached the same truth as many others of his time. But guess what? They said, this person, this man, talks with what? Authority. The authority is that lived out experience. Amen. Sabbath. The strongest argument in favor of the gospel is a loving and what? Lovable Christian. If we would humble ourselves before the Lord and be kind and courteous and tenderhearted and pitiful, we would have 100 conversions to the truth where there now is only one. You see, really, truth does matter, folks. Do you know why we're here this Sabbath? Well, because it's the Sabbath. And we're worshiping God, right? We're not here Sunday because the Bible doesn't teach Sunday. And that is a truth. Am I right or not? But you know why we're here? It's because we believe in a God that is a creator and sustainer of life. And the very creator and sustainer of life that made us in the beginning can remake us, which gives us hope beyond death. Are you with me or not? Because you have to believe in a God that is a creator, that in the moments before your death, that you know that he can take this and recreate it. Are you with me or not? Which is a tremendous miracle. And that God that is a creator that comes, guess what he does? In order for us to know that he is creator, he voids space and time. Because he knows we live within space and time. Are you with me or not? And no other existing or whatever made up God asks for time. Have you noticed that? They'll ask for sacrifices, they'll ask for allegiance, they'll ask for obedience, they'll ask for many things, but they don't ask for time. Do you know why? Because they don't exist. Because only a God that exists in time can ask for time. Did you get that or not? And so God, knowing that we exist in time and he exists in time, that he is real and that he can transform and create and recreate, you know what he does? In order for you to know it also, he voids time and says, I want to spend this time with you. I don't want you only to serve me, and I don't want you to believe in vain. I want to come and be with you. And in order to be with you, do you know that you need time? Ladies, right? You know, your husband's coming and say, I love you, honey. You say, when are you going to spend some time with me? Just know that I love you. Is that good enough? No, right? You know that if all of a sudden your husband says, you know, honey, I love you, and all Monday I'm going to spend with you. You go, what, did extraterrestrials sequester your body? Because that's for real. Are you with me or not? It's beyond the rhetoric. And God is beyond the rhetoric. God comes to our existence and he says, I want to spend this time, and I will void time, and I will spend time and be with you. And that time you will know that I am God. You will know that I am God that sanctifies you. You will know that I am God that creates you. You will have the faith to be able to confront anything because you've spent that time with me. And truth embodied, do you know what it is? I get this question a lot. So if one of my friends or relatives invites me to the baseball game on Sabbath, what shall I tell them? You know, it would be good to go to do missionary work, to not, you know, in other words, to say, we shouldn't compromise our faith, right? It's not about that at all. It said, I'm sorry, folks, I have a previous engagement. And it's very important. Because someone that is very important to my life said, I need to meet with you. And I really can't give up that engagement. It is so meaningful to me. Are you with me or not? And it's no apology. And when they say, who is it? It's God. Are you kidding? They'll say, you mean you think God comes to you? Yes, he does, and you ought to experience him too. And I can show you how to do that. That's embodied truth. Words matter, and I finish with this. And this is important because this has to do with us. These things are not of the world, they're about us and how we touch people's lives. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions and with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the God's people. You see, words do matter. Listen to what James says. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and itself will be set on fire by hell. That's a strong thing about our tongue, right? Well, as I read these verses in life, I started experiencing that every time we talk, we either bless or curse. Did you get that one or not? And every time we talk, we're either raising a prayer to God or to the devil. Because the devil hears our prayers just as God hears them. And when we let loose, are you with me or not? And we say, what a hypocrite. God is not listening to that prayer. The devil is. Did you get that or not? And that person, something should happen to them to teach them a lesson. And we say these things with such, are you with me or not? Well, I believe that when we do that, that person's life is affected by the devil, not by God. Now, you may say, oh, that sounds like the Outer Limits, and you can put that in music. It's sort of just, we don't believe in witchcraft and all those kinds of things. But, folks, a lot of people are going through depression, and I believe that many times it's because others are being very mean to them. And words do matter. Now, whether you believe it or not, I'm going to give you a practical thing. Is that all right? Dr. Russell Burrell taught me this, so it's not mine. But every time we would have meetings in a church a few months in advance, we had a communion service. And during that communion service, he would tell the story of Stone Chapel. And because the unity is important. And Stone Chapel was a church that was packed. And it was packed with all sorts of people. There were older people and younger people, people with tattoos and people without tattoos, people with long hair and people with short hair. And they came dressed in different ways, but it was packed. And the fame of Stone Chapel had gone out. And so a reporter decided to see what this Stone Chapel was all about. And so he went to this little town and he couldn't find Stone Chapel. There were no chapels that were made out of stone. And finally, he asked a young man, because he had the address and it didn't look like it. He said, could you direct me to Stone Chapel? And the young man said, yes, that church right there. And he looked, and it was just a church with siding, wood siding. There was not even stone in the entrance. And he says, that's Stone Chapel? Yeah, that's Stone Chapel right there. Well, I said, well, they must have put the name for another reason. And so he came in, and he was amazed. He couldn't find a place to sit. And people were joyous in the Lord. And it didn't matter where he looked. There were people from all sorts. And he said, what attracted all these people? But what called his attention right away was that in the front, there was a huge wooden cross on the floor. And the cross had hit the communion table and shattered the communion table. And he thought this morning they had an accident because there was a cross on the floor, the beautiful wooden communion table was shattered in pieces. And he said they didn't have time to pick it up. So he put that out of his mind, and they went on with worship. And then after worship, he talked to the pastor. And he said, wow, I haven't been in a church where I can experience the presence of Christ like I have in this church. And the people are happy, and they're welcoming, and they love each other, and they welcome everybody from everywhere. And he said, but I'm curious, did you have an accident this morning? And the pastor laughed. No, he says, that happened months ago. He said, what do you mean? You didn't pick it up? No, we just left it there. And he went on to tell the story. And the story was when they were building that chapel, they wanted to put a huge wooden cross in the front of the chapel. And some people started giving ideas because they wanted to look like it was in the air. And some said, we'll put a pipe in the wall and then put the pipe in the back of the cross, and it'll hold it up in the air, and people will think it's levitating by itself. And others said, no, we don't want to put a pipe. It's like nailing a pipe to the cross. It's sacrilegious. We should tie it with nylon strands. You know, strong nylon strands, and then nobody will see it. And if we put the lights in the right direction, well, guess what? They got into a fight, but the nylon strands people won. And they hoisted the cross up, and one day during worship, bing! That was the first sound. And from there on, the wooden cross broke the cords and came down to the communion table and shattered the communion table. And as soon as that happened, everybody got up and started saying, I told you so. You know, you guys are so hard-headed, and you're always running the church, and not only running the church, and all the grievances throughout the ages were now out. Are you with me or not? Things that happened many years ago. I told you 20 years ago that the church can't be like this, and you're hard-headed and you're domineering, and you shut up, and they were ready to get into a fist fight. The wooden cross had unveiled the division, are you with me, in the church that was thinly veiled out of just courtesy. All of a sudden, they noticed that one of the deacons left the church. They stopped arguing for a moment, thinking they had offended him. But they were in the midst of it, so they continued. And a little while later, they see him coming in with a wheelbarrow full of rocks, stones. And he put the wheelbarrow in the midst of the fight. That's all he did. And they remembered. He or she who has no sin, cast the first. And they each picked up a rock with tears, and they sat down. And there was silence. And so Russell tells that story, and he has a big bag of rocks. And he hands them out to the church. And he says, could I ask you for the next months to carry this with you? And that when you have something to say about someone, take your rock. And he or she who has no sin, cast the word. But if you do, be quiet. And so he gives out rocks. Now in the meeting, and I won't say where and I won't say how, there was a lady coming to the meetings, and it was far in advance, and Sabbath celebration was coming, and we invited everybody to the Sabbath. People who had never kept the Sabbath before, who had never spent time with Jesus on that day. What a blessing. And one lady said to me out loud, hey Ed, I'm so happy because I also heard there's going to be that thing that people bring food. What is it called? The luck pot? No, I said potluck. She thought, well, if you're lucky, you get to eat. That's what she thought. And she said, you know why I'm so happy? Because I'm going to bring my famous meat calzone. And somebody heard. And they didn't hear right there. They were like, she was over there and they were over there. And they yelled across the church, "We don't eat meat here." And the poor lady turned all sorts of colors. And I said to her, "Honey, you bring your meat calzone. I'll eat it by myself." And then she felt a little bit better. I was irate. Now, understand, I'm not proposing here, so you don't need to get into a big fight, vegetarianism. Do you follow me? What I'm talking is just loving people. And when they come in as they are. Is that all right? They don't come in vegan. By the way, I'm working on my vegan. And I've got it down from 12 o'clock to 4 in the morning. That's right. I'll work on the other 20 hours, but I'm working on it. Is that all right? They didn't understand. And I was irate. And I went out after the meeting and I got Russ and I told him, "I need to tell you a story, Russell." And I told him the story, how irate I was that people would treat someone like that. He never said anything. He never agreed with me. He never got into, do you follow me? The sort of, all he did was he pulled out his rock and he showed it to me. And he said, "Where's yours?" Because that's what it was all about. That no matter even if we're right, we have no right in Jesus Christ. Are you with me? Because he is the only Holy One. And so I carry a rock and it says, "Be still and know that I am God." Psalms. Be still and know. And I carry it with me. By the way, this is the second or third because I have to rub it a lot. Not that I believe a genie will come out, but sometimes I need to rub it. Are you with me? Just kind of feel it that it's there. Folks, this church matters. Because this is the church that God is counting on to be the light of this community, to be the light of this world. And so he needs us to believe the message and live it. He needs us, folks, to be grace-oriented, to love people, to love everyone. And even if they come in and they offend our sensibilities because we're not like them, that's the God's children that are coming home. Is that all right? And they come just as they are. And he needs us. He needs us to bless every person. To bless our spouses, to bless our children, to bless our neighbors. That every word that comes out of our mouth will be a prayer for the people that surround us. And I believe with all my heart that God will bless you.